Welcome back to Rights and Recourse. If you'd like to be part of the discussion, you can still call us on 011 714 6918 or 6919 or tweet us on Rights Recourse. The question I wanted to find out is, can organizations, companies employment agencies use adverse information on your credit status to deny you an opportunity to get a job?
The law is very specific as to, the circumstances under which that could happen. But what we have seen in the market is that now it's being applied willy-nilly across, the whole sector, even where it's not supposed to be happening. So definitely there are agencies that are using the fact that you were listed at the credit bureau to deny you employment, even in categories of employment where it should not be happening.
But I think, Dumela, also, just to add on to that, is that those who are conducting those, if it's an employment agency, as an example, they are not really trained to understand that credit records have got different aspects to it. Whatever listing you have has got different severities to it. And I think you could be denied a job for something very petty, if we can call it that, on your credit bureau report. So that too is also, there needs to be quite a bit of education for recruitment specialists and those guys in organizations who deal with recruitment to understand what those notifications are on the bureau report, because I think they're not quite clued up. It's not their area of expertise in any case. So, for them to be doing those applications and declining you based on that is sometimes a bit questionable.
The other thing that you've got to remember is that the intention, and quite clearly spelt out in the Act, is that it's only with regards to handling of cash and where you have a position of trust. Both of those factors must be together. So the reality is that when you read that together with what Naya said, they actually must be much more careful as to denying people employment on any other basis.
But from the NDMA point of view, we also feel that that is a very judgmental approach. We know that a lot of consumers who cannot pay, no one wakes up in the morning and say, I'm not going to pay the credit provider. It's because they've lost their job, they've been retrenched, they've gone through a divorce, cost of living has gone up, petrol has gone up, food has gone. That puts pressure on your income, and as a result, you are not able to pay. Then what do you get? You get somebody who's now judging you to say, because you could not pay your debt, you are actually a dishonest person, which we know that in a majority of cases, that is not true. So we do not agree with that thing, that because you are listed. And anyway, for you to be able to go back and settle that debt and pay it, you need a job. So for us, it doesn't make sense. We feel that that should actually be scrapped, because it's not a reflection on your character. You went through, companies go, they fall down, they come back again, they continue to operate. Governments have budget issues. We have deficits. They have to find a way to make more money in order to cope. It happens to everybody. So we feel that that should not apply anyway.
Well, Mahouda there with what comes first, the chicken or the egg. Louisa in Pretoria there, many creditors, especially commercial banks, believe that the amnesty will encourage reckless lending. It will also, according to Cass Kuvadi of Banking SA, it will be counterintuitive and will make lending more risky, and banks will have to price the risk. I think you made reference to that too, that banks will price the risk. Wouldn't that be making it difficult for consumers? You can answer the fact that, first, they say it's going to lead to reckless lending. And then the second part of that question is the price of the risk. They will price the risk. In other words, you'll be expected to pay more interest.
Okay. First, in terms of, the recklessness issue, let me just add to say that the NCR is working on draft affordability assessment guidelines. And the reason that we are doing this is meant to enhance, to the issue of the amnesty, as it's called, because we are saying that, you know, even though consumers are being given a second chance, we are not saying that, you know, credit should be granted recklessly. And even under the current situation where the data was retained, there were instances where the NCR has taken certain credit providers to court and you know, to the tribunal, I mean, and they were being charged with reckless lending. So now back to the issue of the guidelines. The guidelines are there to guide credit providers, because what we've seen, for instance, I can just quote two variables. The first one is around income. We've seen that, you know, there are credit providers who do not even verify a consumer's, you know, claim to a particular income amount. And secondly is the issue of expenses. We've seen that some credit providers take the consumer's word for it, if I can put it like that, when they do assessments. We've seen instances, for example, where a consumer will be saying, I spend about 30 rand for food a month, and a credit provider takes that as a true reflection. So the guidelines are there to ensure that we improve the standard that is being used by credit providers when they do assessments. Now, secondly, on the issue of the pricing of the risk, like I stated earlier, the payment profile will still be there, and that still counts. And I think Stephen said it accounts for about 35% of the score. So that will still be there, and it will still be useful for credit providers when they have to price for the risk.
When we come back, we will talk about affordability, because the last time in our discussion, when we had this discussion, we spoke about affordability. I think Louisa made reference to it in her reply. When we come back, we'll go back to that. Please continue to call us on 714-6918, 6919, or tweet us on Recourse. We'll be back after the break. Welcome back to Rights and Recourse. Thanks for staying with us here on Rights and Recourse. Louisa made mention of the National Credit Tribunal. Louisa, quickly, I've asked Stephen to help you here. What is the National Credit Tribunal?
Okay, in terms of the NCA, the NCR is the regulator, and the tribunal serves as the court. For example, in instances where the NCR finds, you know, issues of contravention, either by a credit provider, a credit bureau, or a debt counselor, we don't have powers under the legislation, for example, to impose fines, administrative fines. We would then refer the matter to the tribunal, and the tribunal is the one that would then impose the fines.
Stephen, do you want to add to that?
No, that's a good explanation.
Now, let's go back to my earlier question. What happens in the area of affordability? What do we do there regarding affordability? Is this not an issue that the credit provider should look at the affordability, as you said earlier?
Affordability is the number one thing that has been done poorly by credit providers over time. Credit providers are known to be very good at working out the probability of default, but the focus has not been on whether or not the consumer can afford the credit. And so while consumers will potentially be able to pay the money back eventually, and that has been the key issue for most credit providers, the regulator and government is very worried about affordability. And they've said, look, forget about just looking at the probability of default and whether or not you can get your money back. Is this good for the consumer? Can they actually afford the credit that they applied for? And if they can't afford it, you mustn't give it, even if you think that eventually they'll pay you back. So I think that these guidelines that the NCR are working on with the help of all the credit providers and credit bureau are critically important, because there's been no standard. There's been no idea of how this should be done. And you get credit providers who, when you're going to apply for your credit, at the point of the till, when you're applying, they just ask you for your gross income and your gross expenses. They don't check anything. You write it on a till slip, and they say, okay, well, it seems you have enough, money left over at the end of the month to afford the repayments. And that's totally inadequate.
Yeah,
It's
we
not put to
also
the test.
we also agree with them.
I just want us to go to those questions on Twitter. We have a couple of questions on Twitter. Vyas Jagannath says, how does this NCA amendment bill affect consumers who have matters pending in court and have been terminated?
That seems to relate to debt cancelling, because you can either have your matter in court pending to have a debt cancelling order being given, or you were under debt cancelling, there was a court order, you did not pay, or something happened in the process, you got terminated, and the credit provider then is in the process of taking legal action against you. Unfortunately, the credit amnesty will not apply to that process, but in terms of the new amendments that have been sent to the President, there will be restrictions on credit providers' rights to terminate, when they can terminate, how they can terminate. So it will make the process a little bit easier on consumers. But for this process, for now, that is not affected.
Quickly, there's another one from Oscar Maduna. Oscar Maduna says, I went to my bank to rearrange my loan payments. I was told my account has to be in arrears first. Is this correct?
Yes, unfortunately, that's where consumers find themselves between a rock and a hard place. If you are not in arrears, you do not qualify to get assistance. Are they then saying you need to, start defaulting, start not paying? So it's quite, but it is true. What he's saying is true from my experience, is that you will be shunted from pillar to post to say, but you're not in arrears. You need to be in arrears first before we can talk to you. So it's just one of those things.
My apologies. I'm told there's a caller on the line. Good afternoon and welcome. Good afternoon. We still have the caller. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, sir. How are you?
Fine, thanks. How are you?
I'm okay, man. I do simply have a question that if you did email the judgment from the court to the NCR, it takes how long so that the line can be cleared?
Well, I think you heard that question.
I'm talking about the data retention period for judgments. So normally on your credit record, a judgment will sit there for 5 years. But the idea here is that when you pay it up, it gets removed as soon as it's been paid. It's a way to incentivize your payment. And I think that that's a point that we need to emphasize. A key aspect of these regulations is to incentivize consumers to make payment, because they get rewarded by the removal of adverse information or the judgment that was taken or put on their credit record. So their credit record is going to be improved if they pay the debt.
Earlier, I made mention of, now, this is purely a marketing issue. Louisa, you can come in here if you want to weigh in. It's purely a marketing issue where you are saying, if you go to the bank today, your information is put into a computer, and if the computer says you're not getting the loan, you are not getting the loan. And as somebody was saying, from a marketing point of view, that is bad, because in the past, you are able to say, let me see the bank manager. Today, you can't say that. They rely very much on that computer.
Yes, but you must understand that we have more than 20 million credit active consumers. I mean, I think even more than 50 million credit agreements. So if you had to sit face to face with it, unfortunately, that's how the times work in terms of the volumes of people who are applying and have credit, that they have to use, more effective, electronic processes to do that. But what I wanted to go back to is the issue of affordability, which I think is good because, you have one credit provider doing a very good affordability assessment, but the other one not doing. So the guidelines will help. But what we've also seen with consumers from the NDMA point of view is that you must also do your own budget. You must also sit down and not rely on somebody else to tell you what you can afford. Because the Act says that if you do not tell the truth to the credit provider when you apply, you cannot claim reckless lending. And some consumers are either induced by the consultant or they themselves voluntarily do not tell the truth that, my groceries per month are 1,000. They will under-declare and say, no, it's 200 rand. Or the consultant will say, no, Miss Mpatlela, don't say 600, say 200. Because it's your word against them. At the end of the day, you as the consumer are going to lose. So we are saying to consumers, do your own affordability assessment, sit down and do your own budget, and be realistic about what you can afford. Another mistake they do, they don't factor in. We've now had an interest rate increase. What are you going to do? Because then your installments are increasing. We now have e-tolls. We now have things are increasing. when you decided at that point to take that credit, did you consider that, rates and taxes will go up? Will I be afford? Will my budget be able to stretch? So those are the things you need to do on your own before you rely on the credit provider to tell you what you can afford and
Louisa,
cannot afford.
when we had this program the first time, the reference was made to a credit provider whose name shall remain nameless, who has an advert running on television saying, if you go to the bank going to ask for a loan, you find there's a big man sitting there waiting for you and still tell you, go and fetch this document, go back home and fetch this document. And you go and fetch it and say, bring your ID. And you go back and fetch your ID. And then this big man still doesn't give you the money. Why have we not taken action against that kind of reckless advertising?
You have to understand that, the issue really isn't around, issue in terms of how fast, the application is processed. Because I think what we've seen as the NCR is credit providers tend to compete in terms of how fast can I, process the application. But the more the issue is, have they done proper assessments? Obviously, credit providers will try and become, a bit innovative in their advertising material. But for as long as they disclose all costs and fees accordingly, they are well within their rights. I just wanted to add to what Mahauta was saying when she said, the responsibility also lies on consumers. Because what we've seen is that, for example, if I have 100 Rand left over at the end of the month, consumers tend to then take on additional obligations to the maximum for the 100 Rand. They do not create buffers for themselves. And I know that, the concept of a buffer has been bandied around by the NCR to say when the credit provider, looks at your credit application, they should build in that buffer to say what happens when petrol increases, what happens when there's a change in your personal circumstances. But the consumer also needs to do the same thing and create a little buffer for themselves.
Quickly, if I could get an answer on this one. Apparently, not all credit providers have access to the full credit record, except for when they are members of the Credit Providers Association.
The Credit Providers Association consists only of credit providers in law. I mean, there are a few others, I think, who contribute, but by and large, you have to be a credit provider in order to get the information, because it's the principle of reciprocity. So if you give the payment information, how people are paying you, then you can find out for how they're paying other credit providers. And as a result, credit providers have detailed information, whereas some others, like for example, doctors or hospitals or schools won't have that detailed information.
And I think it also goes back to the credit provider's subscription. What kind of subscription do they have with the bureau? And that will entail how much of the information are they able to view.
Well, earlier we showed you the numbers that you can call for assistance. Then you can call Mahauta's organization, the National, what is it again?
Debt Mediation
National
Association.
Debt Mediation Association and the Credit Ombudsman. The number is also there, and the National Credit Regulator. The number. So we've given you even a credit bureau, TransUnion, the one of the most famous one. You can call them and get details from them for this process. Louisa, the issue here, finally, let us get this issue of the education drive. How is this education drive going to take place? Can we rely on the good offices of the National Credit Regulator?
Certainly we're going to go out on TV, on radio, but obviously we need the support of other stakeholders in the industry, because they also have access to consumers, so they can assist us in spreading the word to consumers to say, it's not an amnesty for you not to pay your debt, but it's to give you a second chance in terms of the information that is contained at the bureaus.
Well, that's it for today. The National Debt Relief and Amnesty will therefore work towards creating a debt environment in which credit and repayments are done rationally and responsibly. It will also reduce on the number of people who have been prejudiced by the listing of adverse credit information, and yet these people have settled their debt. This amnesty and relief in the long run will act as a catalyst and stimulant to economic growth and a great step to attaining a healthy credit market. This has been Rights and Recourse. Thank you to our guests from all of us in the studio. Have a good afternoon. This program is repeated at 10 tonight and 5 in the morning on Monday morning. My name is Dumela Mateza. Good afternoon.